The Bitterroot Valley stretched wide and cold beneath an October sky the color of old iron.
Inside, at a kitchen table, a young woman sat very still. A piece of paper. Another name waited above the empty line. Her hand remained steady. She had already made the decision before.
Eleanor Marsh did not cry when her father slid the paper across the kitchen table. She did not cry when she read her own name written beside a stranger's. She did not cry when her mother turned toward the window and found something outside worth studying that had never interested her before. She picked up the pen. She signed. And when the ink dried, something inside her went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the last person leaves and the door clicks shut behind them. She was 21 years old. The paper on the table had just decided the shape of the rest of her life, and the man whose name sat beside hers was someone she had never met. She set the pen down. She did not look at her father. The Marsh farm sat in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, and it had been failing for 2 years in the particular way that land fails when the sky stops cooperating and debt fills the space that rain used to occupy. 2 dry summers had cracked the soil into something that looked like the bottom of a riverbed. 1 brutal winter had taken 3 of their best cattle and warped the barn door so badly it no longer closed properly. The fence along the north pasture had been needing repair since the previous spring and had not received it, because repair requires lumber, and lumber requires money, and money was the one thing the Marsh family had run completely out of. Her father, Arthur Marsh, was not a bad man. Eleanor had spent a great deal of her 21 years being certain of that, and she remained certain of it even now, standing on the porch of the farmhouse in the thin October light, looking out at the fields he had worked for 2 decades, the cracked soil, the sagging fence line, the barn with its warped door that let in cold air and let out everything that was supposed to stay warm. She made herself understand very clearly what she was doing and why, standing there with that inventory of failure spread out before her, because she was not a woman who acted without understanding her own reasons. He was a man who had been defeated by circumstances he had not entirely created and could not entirely control, and defeat had made him smaller in the way it makes some men smaller, quieter, more careful, less able to look directly at the people he had failed. He had signed the paper before she entered the room. She had noticed that. His signature was already dry when she sat down. Her younger sister, Nora, appeared in the doorway behind her, 14 years old, wearing a dress whose hem had been let down twice already and was still too short. She had the shadows under her eyes that children get when they have spent too many nights listening to their parents talk in low voices about things they are not supposed to understand but do. "Papa says you're going to be all right," Nora said. Eleanor looked at her sister, at the worn hem, at the shadows, at the thinness of her wrists that had nothing to do with being 14 and everything to do with the past 6 months. "Go back inside," Eleanor said. "It's getting cold. Are you scared?" Eleanor considered the question the way she considered most things, carefully, and without the luxury of saying the first true thing that came to mind. "No," she said. She lied. She was more frightened than she had ever been in her life. Not of the man. She had not met him, and terror requires a face to attach itself to. She was frightened of the shape of the future she could already see forming ahead of her, narrow and fixed like a canyon with no visible exit. She was frightened of the particular loneliness of belonging to a life you did not choose, but she did not say any of that. She watched Nora disappear back inside, and then she stood on the porch a little longer and told herself the things she needed to believe. Her family was going to lose everything. The debt was real. The bank's patience was not, and she had the means to stop it. Not money, not land, not anything she owned. Only herself. Only her name beside a stranger's on a piece of paper. Some women in her position might have called that sacrifice. Eleanor called it arithmetic. You counted what you had. You spent what was necessary. You did not weep over the transaction. She went back inside before the cold could make her eyes water and be mistaken for something else. Her father was still at the kitchen table. He had not moved the paper. He sat with his hands folded over it like a man covering something he cannot bear to look at but cannot bring himself to put away. "Clara," he said. He had called her that since she was small, a name inside a name, something that belonged only to the space between them. "I signed it," she said. "I know. You didn't ask me first." He exhaled, the long, slow sound of a man who has run completely out of room inside himself. "I didn't have a choice." "You had one," Eleanor said. "You just didn't want to make it." He looked up then. His eyes were red at the edges. She had not seen her father cry since her grandfather's funeral 7 years ago, and she did not want to see it now. She turned away before it could happen. "When do I go?" she asked. 3 weeks, he said. She nodded once, walked to her room, and closed the door behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and told herself things that were not entirely true. She told herself she was strong enough for this. She told herself she had survived harder things, though she was not certain that was accurate. She told herself that Caleb Hargrove was just a man, and that men could be managed if you were careful enough and quiet enough and useful enough. She had heard the name Caleb Hargrove spoken in the town of Red Rock her entire life. He was not the kind of man people forgot to mention. He owned Hargrove Ranch, which was the largest cattle operation in the Bitterroot Valley and possibly in the entire territory, depending on who you ask. He had come to Montana from somewhere east. No one agreed on exactly where, and had built the ranch from nothing over 15 years of work that people described the way they describe weather. Relentless, impersonal, and not particularly concerned with how you felt about it. People described Caleb Hargrove with the same vocabulary they used for the mountains. Immovable, cold at altitude, present in a way that made you aware of your own smallness without meaning to. He was somewhere around 42, she had been told, though no one seemed to know his exact age. He had never been married. Nobody in Red Rock knew why, and the theories varied depending on who was talking. Some said he was too difficult to live with. Some said he had loved someone once and she had left. Some said he simply did not need anyone, which was the detail that frightened Eleanor most, because a man who had convinced himself he needed no one was a man with no practice in considering what the person beside him might need. She lay down fully dressed and stared at the ceiling until the house went quiet. Then she stared at it some more. She made herself a promise in the dark, the way people make promises when they are alone and frightened and have nothing else to hold on to. She would go. She would honor the agreement because her family's survival depended on it. And she was not the kind of woman who let children go without enough to eat in order to preserve her own comfort. She would be useful. She would be competent. She would manage the household the way she had always managed everything, with precision and without complaint. She would not weep. She would not wish for things to be different. She would not, under any circumstances, allow herself to mistake obligation for affection or politeness for something warmer than strategy. She would survive Caleb Hargrove the way she had survived everything else, by keeping her heart behind a locked door and the key in her own pocket. The 3 weeks passed in the strange suspended way of time you are waiting to be finished with. Life continued. Meals were cooked. Nora and her younger brother went to school. Her father worked the fields with the desperate energy of a man trying to outrun his own conscience. Her mother began pressing Eleanor's 2 best dresses with unusual care, as though the quality of the stitching might matter in a situation like this. As though a well-hemmed dress might make the difference between a life that was bearable and one that was not. Nobody talked about it directly. Neighbors came to call and spoke in soft, careful voices about what a fine arrangement it was, what a solid man Caleb Hargrove was said to be, how fortunate Eleanor ought to feel, which was always what people said to women who were being handed from one set of circumstances to another, and were expected to be grateful for the journey. Eleanor smiled and offered coffee and said very little and waited for them to leave. One afternoon, 4 days before she was to go, a woman named Harriet Boone stopped by. She was the postmistress in Red Rock, somewhere around 60 years old, with the quality of someone who had seen enough of life to stop being surprised by most of it, and who had developed in its place a very clear and unsentimental way of seeing things as they actually were. She found Eleanor on the porch mending one of Nora's dresses. "How are you doing, girl?" Harriet asked, sitting herself down in the other chair without being invited. "I'm fine," Eleanor said. "You're a poor liar," Harriet said pleasantly, "which will probably serve you well where you're going." Eleanor's needle paused. "I knew Caleb Hargrove's mother," Harriet said. "Years ago, before she passed. Strong woman. Raised that boy mostly alone after his father left. The father just went when Caleb was 9 years old. Didn't leave for any particular reason anyone could name. Just decided the life he had wasn't the life he wanted." Eleanor looked up from the mending. "Most people in this town have decided what Caleb Hargrove is," Harriet continued. "Cold, difficult, a man who buys things, land, cattle, agreements, because buying is the only language he trusts." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you he's warm. He isn't. But I will tell you this. Men who are truly cold don't leave sacks of flour on widows' porches in the dead of winter and ride away before anyone sees them. I've watched him do it twice." Eleanor set her needle down. "He does that?" "He does. Without anyone asking. Without waiting to be thanked." Harriet stood brushing off her skirt. "I'm not telling you to love him, child. I'm telling you not to decide what he is before you've looked at him properly. That's the advice I wish someone had given me at your age." She left without another word. Eleanor sat with that for a long time, the image of a man leaving flour on a widow's porch in the dark and riding away before anyone could see him. She had built a very precise picture of Caleb Hargrove in her mind. Cold. Transactional. A man who had purchased a wife the way he might purchase additional acreage, for utility, not affection. And it was a picture that served her. It kept her expectations low and her walls high, which was exactly where she needed them. She did not want Harriet Boone introducing cracks into that picture. But the cracks appeared anyway. The morning she left, her father came to stand beside the wagon while the driver loaded her single trunk. He looked older than she remembered, though she had been looking at him every day. Grief ages people that way, overnight, when you finally let yourself see it. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said, not unkindly, just clearly. "I need you to know I know," she said. "I understand why you did it. I'm not angry." A pause. "I can't hear it right now. Maybe later." He nodded. His jaw worked for a moment, like a man chewing on words he cannot quite bring himself to swallow. "You were always the strongest of all of us," he said finally. She did not respond to that. She climbed into the wagon, sat straight, and looked forward. She did not look back as it pulled away. She came close to it once, felt the pull of it, the almost turning. But she tightened her jaw and kept her eyes on the road ahead and told herself that looking back served no one, least of all the woman she needed to become for whatever was coming next. Hargrove Ranch was a half-day's ride from Red Rock through country that got bigger and quieter the further you went from town. The Bitterroot Mountains rose to the west, enormous and gray-white with early snow at the peaks. The valley stretched out wide and golden with dried autumn grass. The sky above it was the particular shade of blue that Montana skies achieve in October, a color that has no name in ordinary language, something between clarity and cold. Eleanor spent the ride constructing 3 different versions of herself. The capable one, the dignified one, the one who was absolutely not frightened. By the time the wagon turned onto the long drive leading to the main house, she had settled on something between all 3, unsatisfying in the way all compromises tend to be but functional. The house came into view gradually, and it was not what she had expected. It was large, genuinely large, but not in the way that wealthy houses are built to impress. There was no ornamentation, no unnecessary width, no porch furniture arranged to signal prosperity. It was large in the way that working spaces grow large over time. Rooms added when they were needed, windows knocked through where the light was best. Practicality winning over aesthetics at every decision point. It was the house of a man who spent his time doing things, not a man who spent his time being looked at. A ranch hand came to take the wagon, a boy of about 17 with ears that stood at slight attention and a hat that did not fit quite right. "You the new missus?" he asked. "Eleanor Marsh," she said, which was not quite an answer, but was the most she was willing to offer. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Hargrove's expecting you. He's in the east stable." She stood in front of the house after the wagon pulled away. She had expected someone to come out and greet her. The housekeeper, a foreman, Caleb Hargrove himself. Some kind of arrival that would give her a moment to compose what her face was doing before anyone examined it. Instead, she was standing alone in front of a large, quiet house with October wind moving through the grass around her, and not a soul in sight. She picked up her traveling bag. She walked toward the east stable. She found him inside. He was crouched beside a horse that was lying on its side, not a position horses typically occupy willingly, which meant this one was in some kind of distress. He had one hand flat against the animal's neck, just below the jaw, and he was speaking to it in a low voice she could not quite make out from the doorway. The horse's breathing was labored and visible. Each exhale was an effort. Eleanor stood in the doorway and did not announce herself. He did not look up. Either he had not heard her arrive, or he had, and the horse took priority. Under the circumstances, that seemed like the correct call. She waited. The horse's breathing began to slow, not into stillness, but into something more even. The visible strain eased slightly. Whatever had been urgent was becoming less so. He stood, and Eleanor had her first real look at Caleb Hargrove. He was tall, genuinely tall, not tall in the way of men who simply stand close to you. He was built the way men are built by decades of physical work, not by intention but by accumulated consequence, the body shaped by what it has been asked to do for 30 years. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples. His face was weathered in the way of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors and had stopped registering it as hardship somewhere around the age of 20. His eyes, when they finally found her, were a very dark brown, calm, watchful, not warm, exactly, but not cold in the way she had anticipated. He looked at her the way a careful person looks at something they are trying to understand before they speak, not assessing her, exactly, more like taking his time, more like he had learned that first impressions made in haste had cost him something before, and he no longer made them quickly. "Miss Marsh," he said. "Mr. Hargrove." A pause lasting about 2 seconds longer than comfortable. "Is your horse all right?" she asked, because something had to fill the silence, and she had decided without quite deciding it that she was not going to start with anything about herself. "She will be," he said. "She tends to work herself up and then needs help, remembering she's fine." He looked at the horse once more, then back at Eleanor. "You want to come inside?" It was not quite a question, but it was not a command either. It was an offer made in the flat, economical tone of a man who did not use extra words because he had not found them particularly useful. "Yes," she said. She followed him across the yard toward the house. He walked at a pace that did not account for her shorter stride, and then, about halfway across, slowed slightly without commenting on it or looking back. She noticed this. She held onto it. Inside, the house was clean and spare. The furniture was solid and old and clearly chosen for durability rather than appearance. There were books on a shelf in the front room, more than she had expected, and better ones. A jacket hung on a hook beside the door. A pair of muddy boots sat on a mat next to it, placed with unusual precision, heels aligned, as though precision in small things was the habit of a man who lived with too much unpredictability in large ones. He led her to the kitchen and put the coffee pot on the stove. She sat at the table. He sat across from her, and they regarded each other with the careful, wary courtesy of two people who have been handed a situation they did not engineer alone and are trying to work out what to do with it. "I want to say something before we go further," he said. "All right," she said. "Your father came to me," he said. "I didn't go to him. I need you to understand that. He told me. The debt is settled. That's done regardless of what happens here." He set his hands flat on the table, the gesture of a man who felt more certain with his palms against something solid. If you decide you don't want this marriage, you can go. Today, tomorrow, a month from now. Your family situation won't change based on your decision. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. You'd let me leave, she said. I'd let you choose, he said. There's a difference. She was quiet. She had spent the entire ride preparing for this conversation to begin with leverage, some gentle arrangement of the facts that reminded her of what she owed and dressed the reminder in the language of generosity. She had her responses ready. She had been prepared to be very clear about what she would and would not accept. She had not been prepared for this. Why? She asked. He looked at her steadily. Because I've had things decided for me before, he said. I didn't care for it. The coffee pot began to make noise on the stove. He stood, poured 2 cups, and set one in front of her without asking how she took it. A small assumption, but not an unreasonable one. She wrapped her hands around the warmth of it. I signed an agreement, she said. You signed it under pressure, he said. That's not the same thing as making a choice. She looked at him for a long time, searching for the angle, the strategy, the thing underneath the words that made them serve a purpose other than what they appeared to serve. She was good at reading people, had been since childhood, had developed it the way people develop skills that are necessary for survival in complicated households. She could usually find the seam in what someone presented. She could not find one here. He appeared to be, as far as she could determine, exactly what he looked like. A man who said what he meant because he had not found the alternative worth the effort. I'll stay, she said, for now. All right, he said. No relief, no satisfaction. Just acknowledgement, as though the answer was one of several he had been equally prepared to receive. I want to be useful, she said. I know how to manage a household. I know accounts. I can read and calculate, and I will not be a decoration. I didn't expect you would be, he said. And I want to understand how this ranch operates, she said. Not to interfere because I need to understand the thing I'm part of. He considered this. I can do that, he said. And I need you to understand something, she said. I am here because I chose to be, not because I owe you, not because I have nowhere else to go. I chose this because my family needed it, and that is a choice I made with my eyes open, but I will not be made to feel like a debt being repaid. The silence that followed lasted long enough that she thought perhaps she had miscalculated, that the even-toned man across from her would flinch or stiffen or reconfigure into something colder. He did none of those things. That's fair, he said. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. All right, she said. Then I suppose we should figure out how this works. The first week was a study in careful geography, 2 people learning the distances between them without acknowledging that distances were being measured. Eleanor learned the house the way she learned everything, methodically, thoroughly, with attention to the things that most people did not bother to notice. She learned which hinges squeaked and which floorboards shifted underfoot, and where the wind came through the walls in ways that would need addressing before winter arrived properly. She learned the rhythms of the place, when the ranch hands came in, when they went out, how the mornings sounded different from the evenings, how the house changed quality when Caleb was in it versus when he was not. That last observation she noted and immediately declined to examine further. The housekeeper, Hester Calloway, had been with Hargrove Ranch for 11 years. She was somewhere around 55, a sturdy, capable woman with the watchfulness of someone who had seen situations like this go badly before and was withholding judgment until the evidence was clearer. She regarded Eleanor's arrival the way a careful person regards a change in weather, attentive to signs, not yet committed to an interpretation. Mr. Hargrove is particular about his mornings, Hester told her on the second day in the tone of a woman delivering important information that is being framed as casual conversation. How so? Eleanor asked. Quiet before 6. He doesn't take well to noise. I'm not particularly noisy. He doesn't take well to being talked at before he's ready to talk either. I'm not particularly chatty, Eleanor said. Hester studied her for a moment, the look of a woman running a rapid and not entirely friendly assessment. Then she nodded, which Eleanor understood to be a provisional passing of whatever examination was being administered. The ranch hands were a different matter. There were 8 of them, ranging from young Clem Whitfield, 17 years old, ears at perpetual attention, hat that never quite fit right, to Walt Briggs, who had been on the ranch for 14 years and had the settled, weathered quality of a man who had decided long ago exactly where he belonged and had the deep satisfaction of having been right about it. They were not unkind to Eleanor, but they were uncertain of her, and that uncertainty manifested as a specific uncomfortable brand of excessive courtesy that was almost as bad as dismissal. They tipped their hats and said ma'am and held doors she had not asked to have held and carefully avoided saying anything in her presence that might have required later explanation. She spent her 3rd morning at the ranch with the account books. They were kept in a wooden box in the study off the main room, and she had asked Caleb on her first full day whether she might look at them. He had said yes with the same uncomplicated directness he seemed to apply to all practical requests. The books were not a disaster. They were not even particularly disorganized. But they were the accounts of a man who tracked money coming in and money going out without analyzing the space between those two things, which meant there were several places where small adjustments could produce meaningful savings that Caleb Hargrove had simply never had the time or the inclination to identify. She spent 3 hours with the books and made a list. That evening, Caleb came in from the fields as the sun went down. She had noticed already that he was always the last one in and the first one out, a detail she added to the accumulating pile of small observations she was collecting about him without any clear plan for what to do with them. "I looked at the accounts," she said when he came to the kitchen. He sat down and accepted the coffee Hester set in front of him. "You're paying 3 separate suppliers for goods that one of them carries at a lower price," Eleanor said. "And you're running the household on a quarterly purchasing schedule, which means you're doing emergency buying several times a year that costs significantly more than it should." He looked at her. "I'm not criticizing," she said. "You've been running this place alone. There's only so much one person can track. What would you change?" he said. She showed him the list. He read through it without interrupting, which she noticed about him that he did not interrupt. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he appeared to have developed the habit of waiting until a person had finished before deciding what response, if any, was actually necessary. "That's good," he said when she finished. "Do it, no committee, no second-guessing, no asking whether she was certain." She had expected at minimum a few questions. She had her answers prepared. He simply said, "Do it," as though the quality of her reasoning was evident, and further discussion would be a waste of time that could be better spent on something else. She went back to the accounts. She was aware in a remote and carefully managed way that the man across the table was not the man she had constructed in her mind over 3 weeks of anticipation. She had built a very clear picture, cold, transactional, a man who had purchased a wife for utility. And there were pieces of him that fit that picture: the economy of his words, the measured quality of his attention, the sense that he moved through his life with the efficiency of someone who had decided long ago that most things were either necessary or they were not. But the picture was not quite right. And she could feel it not being right, the way you feel a door that is slightly off its frame. Everything apparently in place, but something not quite settling the way it should. She filed this observation away alongside the others and returned to the problem of the quarterly purchasing schedule. On the 4th day, Walt Briggs found her in the south pasture, where she had gone to walk the fence line and understand the property by looking at it, rather than reading about it on a map. Walt was somewhere around 60, a man shaped by decades of outdoor work the same way Caleb was, but where Caleb carried his years with a certain controlled tension, Walt carried his with the settled ease of a man who had made his peace with most things and had no particular quarrel with the ones he hadn't. He fell into step beside her without being invited, which told her something about the kind of man he was. 14 years on this land, he said, not as information exactly, but as the opening to something else. "I know," Eleanor said. "Hester told me. Did she tell you how he started?" "She mentioned 40 head of cattle in a house without a proper roof." Walt nodded slowly. "What she didn't mention is that for the first 2 winters he slept in the barn so the hands could have the house. Told everyone it was because he needed to be close to the cattle." Walt paused. "It wasn't because of the cattle." Eleanor kept walking. She did not say anything, which she had learned was often the most useful response when someone was working their way toward the thing they actually wanted to say. "His mother died 6 years ago," Walt said. "She'd been living with a cousin in Missoula. When she got sick, he brought her here. Set up the room at the end of the East Hall. You've probably noticed it. Nobody uses it now." Eleanor had noticed it. The door was always closed. There was something about the quality of the closed door, something deliberate in it, the way things are deliberate when they are also painful. For 11 nights before she passed, Walt said, he sat in that room and read to her. Her eyes had gone, and she liked to be read to. Dickens, mostly. She said Dickens moved fast enough to keep up with real life. Walt was quiet for a moment. "I only know because I came in early one morning and heard him through the door." He didn't know anyone could hear. When she passed, he came out the next morning and started work at his regular time. We didn't know what to say to him, and he didn't wait for us to know. They had reached the far corner of the south pasture. Eleanor stopped and looked out at the line of cottonwood trees that marked the creek below, their leaves gone yellow and trembling in the October wind. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Walt turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as the one he made when he was choosing his words more carefully than usual. "Because that man in the house has been carrying everything alone for a very long time," he said, "and he's not going to ask you to help him carry it. That's not how he's built, but that doesn't mean he doesn't need it." He put his hat back on. "That's all I wanted to say." He turned and walked back toward the barn, and Eleanor stood at the fence line a little longer, looking at the cottonwoods and the creek and the mountains beyond them. And she thought about a man sitting in a dark room reading Dickens to a dying woman for 11 nights, and coming out the next morning and starting work at his regular time, because the work was what he had, and he did not know how to ask for anything else. She had come to this ranch braced for a man who used his strength as a weapon. She had found one who used it as a wall. The distinction, she was beginning to understand, was everything. That night, late, well past the hour when the ranch had gone quiet and the lamp under Hester's door had gone dark, Eleanor heard a sound she could not immediately identify. She lay still and listened. It was faint, coming from down the hall. She told herself it was the wind. The house was old enough and large enough to make all manner of sounds at night, and she had not yet learned all of them. Then she heard it again. A voice, low and even, reading aloud. She got up. She moved down the hall in the dark, the floorboards cool under her feet, and she stopped outside the door at the end of the east hallway. The door that was always closed, always deliberate. The one she had not touched and had not asked about. The lamp inside was low. She could see the thin line of its light beneath the door. She heard him reading, his voice carrying the cadence of someone who has read the same passages many times, who knows where the sentences are going before they arrive, who is not reading for comprehension anymore, but for something else entirely, for the sound of it, for the company of words in a dark room when there is nothing else to hold on to. Dickens. She recognized it after a moment, the rhythm of it, the shape of the sentences. She stood in the hallway and did not move. He did not know she was there. The reading continued, unhurried, quiet, sustained by some private purpose she was only beginning to understand. This was not performance. There was no audience for this, had never been meant to be one. This was a man in a room with a loss he had been carrying for 6 years, and this was what he had found to do with it. She stood outside that door long enough to understand something she had not understood before. Then she turned and walked back to her room as quietly as she had come. She did not knock. She would never mention what she had heard. She would never give him the discomfort of knowing he had been seen in the moment he was most himself. But she lay awake for a long time after, staring at the ceiling of the room that was slowly becoming her room, and the picture she had built of Caleb Hargrove had changed in a way that could not be undone. Not broken, replaced, with something more complicated and more true. She pressed her lips together in the dark and acknowledged, with the clear-eyed honesty she applied to everything, what had happened. She had come to Hargrove Ranch expecting to find a man she could manage and a situation she could endure. What she had found, in the span of 1 week, was something that was going to require considerably more from her than endurance. She was not ready to name what it would require, but she felt the shape of it, the way you feel a coming change in weather before the sky has done anything yet to make it visible. Outside, the Montana night was enormous and quiet. The mountains stood in the dark. The horses were still in their stalls. The ranch breathed around her, slow and settled, a place that knew what it was. She was not sure yet what she was, but she was beginning, again all careful planning, to want to find out. Silas Drummond rode on to Hargrove Ranch on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of October, and Eleanor knew what he was before he dismounted. She was in the study with the account books when she heard the horse, a single rider, moving at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual, the deliberate pace of a man who had calculated exactly the impression his arrival should make. She looked up through the window and watched him swing down from a gray gelding that cost more than most men in the Bitterroot Valley earned in a year. He was somewhere around 55, broad through the shoulders, well dressed in the way that announced money without appearing to try, which was itself the most expensive kind of trying. He moved across the yard with the bearing of a man who had spent so many years entering spaces as though they already belonged to him that the habit had become indistinguishable from his natural gait. Eleanor set her pen down and watched. Caleb came out from the barn. She could not hear everything from where she sat, but she could hear the register of it. Drummond's voice carrying the expansive, unhurried ease of a man pitching something he was confident you would eventually say yes to, and Caleb's responses clipped and final in the way of a man who has already decided and is simply waiting for the other person to finish speaking. The conversation lasted perhaps 12 minutes. Drummond left. Caleb came inside. He went directly to the stove, poured coffee, drank half of it standing at the kitchen window with his back to her, and set the cup down with slightly more precision than usual. Eleanor came to the kitchen doorway. "Who is he?" she asked. "A man with an offer I'm not interested in." "What kind of offer?" He turned and looked at her. His jaw was set in the way she had come to recognize. Not anger exactly, but the controlled cousin of it. The version a man maintains when he knows that losing his composure will cost him something he cannot afford to lose. "He wants to buy the south pasture," Caleb said. "He's been wanting it for 3 years. Every few months he rides out and makes a new case for why I should sell. And you won't." "No." She waited. He set his coffee cup down. "That pasture runs the length of the best water source on this property," he said. "A creek that feeds directly into the water table 4 smaller ranches depend on. Without it, this ranch loses its independence from outside supply. Without it, every rancher within 6 miles is buying water at whatever price someone else decides to charge." He paused. "Drummond has been acquiring water rights across this valley for 2 years. He already controls 2 of the 3 main sources to the north." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She thought about what that meant, not just for Hargrove Ranch, but for the families on those 4 smaller spreads. People she had not met yet. People with the same cracked fields and sagging fence lines as the Marsh farm, except they had not had a daughter to trade. "He's not interested in the land," she said. "He's interested in the position the land gives him over everything around it." Caleb looked at her. "That's right, and he'll keep coming back. He's a patient man," Caleb said. "He has the kind of money that makes patience easy." Eleanor turned and went back to the study. She sat down at the desk, pulled the land documents from the wooden box, and began reading. She read carefully, the way she had learned to read contracts after her father lost an equipment dispute 3 years ago because he had not read one carefully enough. After that, she had read every document he signed. She had become, out of necessity, someone who looked for what was missing as much as what was present, because it was usually the absence of a word, the vagueness of a phrase, the looseness of a definition, that caused the damage. She found it on the 4th page. A water rights addendum, attached to the original deed, written in language that was technically sufficient but structurally imprecise. The rights were described as attached to the primary use of the land, which sounded definitive until you considered what a determined lawyer could do with the phrase primary use. If the use of the south pasture could be argued to have changed, or if the water rights could be characterized as having been intended as separate from the land title itself, there was enough ambiguity to build a legal challenge on. Not a strong challenge, but enough of one, enough to tie things up in territorial court long enough to cause damage. She sat with this for a while, thinking it through. A man like Drummond did not keep making the same direct offer unless he had a secondary approach already built and waiting. He had been patient because he had been building towards something. And this imprecise paragraph, she was becoming increasingly certain, was what he had been building toward. Then she heard Caleb in the hallway, and she brought the document to the kitchen doorway. "Come look at this," she said. He sat down across from her at the table. She placed the document between them and pointed to the paragraph, the exact language, the specific problem, the way a skilled lawyer might approach it. He read it. He read it again. "How did you find this?" he said. "I was looking for it," she said, "or something like it. A man like Drummond doesn't keep making the same direct offer unless he has a secondary approach already in mind. He's been patient because he's been building toward something." She tapped the paragraph. "This is probably what he's been building toward." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "You need a lawyer to look at this," Eleanor said. "Someone who can tighten that language before Drummond finds the thread and starts pulling it." "There's a man in Red Rock," Caleb said. "Samuel Voss. He's handled the ranch's legal matters before. Good attorney." "Go see him this week," Eleanor said, "before Drummond has time to consult his own counsel if he hasn't already." Caleb looked at her across the document, across the lamp between them and the necessary distance of the table, with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the careful, measured neutrality she had grown accustomed to. Not the controlled consideration. Something else. Something that appeared in the rare moments when he had stopped managing what his face was doing and simply let it say what it meant. "You figured all of that out in 20 minutes, he said. "I figured out the risk in 20 minutes, she said. "The solution will take longer." He went to see Samuel Voss in Red Rock the following day, and then the day after that, and twice more the following week, riding out early and returning in the late afternoon with the focused, slightly compressed quality of a man working through a problem that requires sustained attention across multiple fronts simultaneously. In his absence, Eleanor ran the ranch household with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. She finalized the changes to the supply schedule. She reorganized the household accounts into a system that would be legible to someone other than herself. She worked through the feed inventory with Clem Whitfield, who had been making small errors in the ledger for weeks, not correcting them quietly, because correcting them quietly wasn't teaching him anything, but sitting down with him and showing him the difference between a carryover entry and a running total until he understood it well enough to catch his own mistakes. Clem was a good student. He was also 17 and clearly uncertain whether he was supposed to be afraid of her or not, which Eleanor found mildly endearing and chose not to address directly. It was on the 3rd day of Caleb's trips to Red Rock that the men appeared on the south fence line. Eleanor was in the kitchen when Clem came in from the east field with the expression of someone carrying information they are not sure what to do with. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "there are men on the south fence, 3 of them. I don't recognize any of them." Eleanor set down the jar she was holding. "Where's Walt?" "North pasture, with the others." She looked at Clem. He was 17 years old and trying very hard to look older. She thought about what Caleb would do. Then she thought about what needed to be done, which was not always the same calculation. "Go get Walt," she said, keeping her voice even. "Don't ride fast. Don't signal anything to those men before we know what they're doing." "Yes, ma'am." He paused. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to walk down to the south fence line," she said. "And you're going to join me there after you've spoken to Walt." She put on her coat. She walked. She moved at the unhurried, purposeful pace of a woman conducting routine business on her own land, because the fastest way to escalate a situation was to approach it like you expected a fight, and she did not want these men to understand they had been specifically noticed until she had seen exactly what they were doing. What they were doing was taking measurements. They had a surveying instrument set up along the fence line, a transit level on a wooden tripod, one man behind the eyepiece, one recording numbers in a ledger, one standing slightly apart watching the property side of the fence with the attentiveness of someone who has been told to pay attention. The area they were working in was precisely where the water rights addendum connected the south pasture to the creek below. Eleanor's stomach went cold. She kept walking. She stopped at the fence and looked at the nearest man, the one standing apart, the one doing the watching. He was about 40. His clothes were clean in a way that suggested he had dressed for this purpose rather than come from any kind of outdoor work. A man performing field work he was not accustomed to. "Afternoon," she said, in the pleasant, even tone of a woman who is gathering information and intends to leave with all of it. The man turned. He looked at her with a brief assessment that he did not quite hide quickly enough. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. "Just conducting a survey." "On Hargrove Ranch land?" she said. "We're on the boundary line," he said. "Public surveying rights apply to boundary assessments." "They apply to the boundary," she said. "Your instrument is 9 feet inside the fence line. That's not the boundary. That's my husband's property." The man looked at the instrument, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, a recalculation happening somewhere behind his eyes. "That must have shifted during setup," he said. "I imagine it must have," Eleanor said pleasantly. "I imagine it would be in everyone's interest to shift it back before Mr. Hargrove returns from town. He has considerably less patience than I do about equipment on his land without his permission, considerably less." The 3 men exchanged a look. "We'll pack up," the nearest one said. "That's very sensible," Eleanor said. She stood at the fence and watched them do it, slowly, with the careful efficiency of men who were annoyed but had decided that annoyance was not currently useful. They loaded the transit and the tripod into their wagon. The man with the ledger closed it without looking at her. The driver clicked to the horses and the wagon moved north, toward the Drummond property. Walt arrived 12 minutes later, slightly out of breath, Clem a length behind him. Clem said there were men, Walt said. "They've gone," Eleanor said. "Walt, I need you to write down the exact position where that instrument was standing, measure it from the fence post if you can, and record the date and the time and the direction they left when they went." She turned to him. "And when Mr. Hargrove comes back tonight, tell him before you tell him anything else." Walt looked at her with the expression of a man who is revising something he thought he already understood. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Not the careful ma'am of the first week, something different. The ma'am of a man who has watched someone do something worth respecting and is marking it accordingly. Caleb returned that evening as the light was going flat and orange across the valley. Eleanor met him at the door, not anxiously, not dramatically, but with the direct purposefulness of a woman who has something to say and has decided the best time to say it is now. She told him everything. The 3 men, the surveying instrument, the 9 feet inside the fence line, the direction they came from and the direction they left. She gave him the note Walt had written. He read it. His face moved through several things in rapid succession, none of them the controlled neutrality she was accustomed to. "He sent surveyors onto my land," Caleb said, very quietly, the quiet of a man keeping something down by main force of will. "Onto your boundary," she said, "technically. But 9 feet inside it. He's moving faster than I expected. The direct offer failed. Now he's trying to establish that the boundary itself is in dispute, which gives him a different angle of attack on the water rights addendum than the one we identified in the deed." Caleb looked at her. "You worked all that out," he said. "On the walk back from the fence," she said. "I've already drafted a letter to Voss explaining what happened and what it likely means. It's on your desk. Read it tonight and add anything I've missed." He stood very still. She watched him absorb it. The fact that she had seen the threat, had handled the immediate situation, had thought 3 steps ahead of it, and had put words on paper before he had even returned to find out what had happened. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise, he had stopped looking surprised by her sometime in the 2nd week. Something else. Something that cost him something to let show. In the way that things cost men something when they have been carrying everything alone long enough that allowing another person to carry any part of it requires a kind of courage they have not practiced. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for the letter." "I know," she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen for a moment that was neither long nor short but simply present. The kind of moment that does not announce itself as significant but is. "Go read the letter," she said. "I'll start supper." He went. That evening after Hester had retired and the ranch had settled into its nighttime quiet, they sat at the kitchen table with the lamp low between them and the remains of supper between them and the silence that had been developing between them over the past weeks, less like distance and more like the specific comfortable absence of speech between 2 people who have stopped needing to fill the air in order to confirm that the other person is there. Caleb said, "My father left when I was 9. Eleanor set her fork down. She did not say anything. She had learned that when he began something like this, the most useful thing she could do was make space for it. He didn't go because of anything that happened, Caleb said. He just went. The way some men do, decided the life he had wasn't the life he wanted, and walked out of it without much ceremony. He looked at the table. My mother never said a word against him, not once. Not even in the years when it was hardest, when there was almost nothing. He paused. I used to think that was weakness, her not saying it. And now, Eleanor said, now I understand it. His voice was even, measured. The voice of a man who has thought about something so long that the thinking has become indistinguishable from the facts. It takes more strength to refuse to poison something that has already hurt you than it does to spend the hurt. Eleanor was very still. She sounds like she was remarkable, she said. She was the best person I have ever known, he said. Not with feeling, or rather with feeling so controlled and so long practiced in its control that the control itself was a kind of feeling. And I spent 30 years trying to be as strong as she was and getting it wrong. How so? Eleanor asked. He looked up at her. She was strong because she chose what she cared about and she tended it. Everything she did was in service of something she had decided mattered. He paused. I was strong because I tried to need nothing. I built everything you see out there on that principle that if you need nothing, nothing can be taken from you. Another pause. Those aren't the same kind of strength. No, Eleanor said softly. They're not. He looked at her for a moment with the unguarded expression, the real one, the one that appeared only in these rare spaces when he had stopped managing what he showed. You remind me of her sometimes, he said, and then, as though the admission had surprised him coming out, I don't say that lightly. Eleanor held his gaze. I know you don't, she said, and I want you to know I'm listening. It was such a simple thing to say, and it landed on him the way simple, true things sometimes land, like something that has been waited for, without knowing it was being waited for. They finished the meal in quiet. She cleared the plates. He sat at the table with his coffee for a long time after she had said goodnight, turning something over in his mind that did not have a name yet but had the weight and shape of something beginning. It was Lydia Crane who arrived the following week. Eleanor was in the barn with the feed ledger when she heard a horse she did not recognize, a single rider, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew where they were going and had been there before. She came to the barn door and saw a woman dismounting at the gate. She was perhaps 35, dark-haired, composed, wearing traveling clothes that had cost real money without appearing to announce it, the most expensive kind of understatement. She had the stillness of a woman who had learned, sometime in her 20s, that rooms adjusted themselves to her arrival and had simply stopped remarking on it. She looked at Eleanor with an expression Eleanor could not immediately classify. You must be the new wife, the woman said. Eleanor Hargrove, Eleanor said. And you are? Lydia Crane. She said it the way people say names they expect to be recognized. Caleb and I were close some years back. I heard he'd married. I was passing through to Billings and wanted to pay my respects. How thoughtful, Eleanor said. She invited Lydia inside. She made coffee. She did these things with the perfect, unhurried composure of a woman who has decided that the most powerful response to a provocation is to refuse to be provoked, and who is also, underneath that composure, paying very close attention to everything. Caleb was out on the north pasture. Lydia sat in the front room and looked around the house with the careful attention of someone taking inventory of differences from what she remembered. It's changed, Lydia said. Oh, Eleanor said, tiddier, warmer. She glanced at Eleanor. That would be you. I manage the household, Eleanor said. Lydia turned her coffee cup in her hands. Something moved through her expression, not the studied composure, but something underneath it. Something more honest and more tired. I spent 18 months trying to get Caleb Hargrove to let me into his life, she said. Not as a complaint. As a fact, stated with the equanimity of a woman who has had sufficient time to make her peace with it. He was kind to me. He was decent to me. And he kept me at exactly the distance he decided was appropriate and never moved an inch from it. She looked up. When I finally left, he didn't ask me to stay. Eleanor said nothing. She held her coffee cup and listened. I'm not here to cause trouble, Lydia said. I want you to know that. A pause. I'm here because I wasted 18 months on a man I thought I could reach. And when I finally accepted that I couldn't, I needed to understand what I had missed. She looked at Eleanor with something very direct. I wanted to see what it looks like when it's working. Against her own careful intentions, Eleanor felt something in her chest shift slightly. Does it look like something? She said. This house is warmer than it was, Lydia said. Not the temperature, the quality of it. She paused. And he stands differently when he looks toward where you are. I noticed it when he came across the yard just now. He doesn't know he does it. Eleanor looked at the wall. She heard Caleb step on the porch before the door opened, and she watched his face in the moment of recognition, the brief stillness, the deliberate composure that replaced whatever had been there before he realized who was sitting in his front room. Lydia, he said. Caleb, she stood, passing through, wanted to say hello. Hello, he said, even. Careful, your wife gave me coffee. Lydia picked up her coat. She's remarkable, by the way. I mean that as a woman who would know what it takes. She looked at Eleanor once more, a look that contained something Eleanor did not have a word for, but that felt like recognition between two women who had each, in different ways, looked at the same man and arrived at very different destinations. Take care of yourself, Eleanor. She left within the hour, riding north toward Billings. Eleanor stood in the doorway and watched the horse disappear up the road. Caleb stood beside her. I should have told you about her, he said. You don't owe me your history, Eleanor said. No, he said. But you handled that with more grace than the situation deserved, and you should know I'm aware of it. She turned and looked at him. Were you in love with her? A pause, the kind that tells you a question has landed in a place that was not expecting to be reached. I thought I might be, he said, for a while. But I kept her at a distance, and eventually she stopped trying to close it. When she left, I realized I felt more relieved than I felt sad. He paused. That told me something. What did it tell you? That I was more comfortable with the idea of her than with her, he said. That I had spent so long deciding how close people were allowed to get that I had stopped noticing the distance was a choice I was making. He looked at her steadily. I've noticed it's harder to do that with you. The air between them changed in the way that air changes when something true has been said in it. Caleb, she said. I'm not asking anything, he said. I just wanted you to know. He went back inside. She stood on the porch for a long moment, her hand on the doorframe, the October air cold against her face, her heart doing something entirely contrary to the instructions she had given it. She went inside. She did not address what he had said. He did not press. They existed that evening in the careful, honest language of two people who had said enough for now, and were not yet ready for what came next, and who both, without saying so, understood that what came next was already decided. That was the evening Eleanor admitted to herself, in the privacy of her own thoughts, what Lydia Crane had made impossible to pretend otherwise. She had not felt jealousy when Lydia sat in that front room. She had felt something sharper and more specific than jealousy, the particular fear of losing something you have only recently understood you cannot afford to lose, and that kind of fear only comes from one place. She lay awake that night with this knowledge and did not try to argue herself out of it. She was above all things honest, and the honest fact was that the locked door she had promised herself on the night she signed her name had been opening incrementally for weeks, through a Tack Calf's easier breathing, through a covered dish left on an old farmer's porch in the dark, through 11 nights of Dickens read aloud to a woman who could no longer see the page. The door was open. She did not yet know what she intended to do about that. The storm arrived on a Wednesday. It had been building for 2 days in the way Montana autumn storms build. A drop in pressure, a specific heaviness settling into the air, the horses growing restless in a way that experienced ranchers read as clearly as a newspaper. Caleb had spent Monday and Tuesday checking everything that needed to be checked, tightening everything that needed to be tightened. On Wednesday morning, he looked at the sky at 5:30 and told Walt to get everyone inside by noon. By 9, the wind had started. By 11, it was serious. By early afternoon, the sky had gone the color of a bruise, and the wind was doing the kind of damage you could hear from inside solid walls. Not the whistle of ordinary wind, but something lower and more deliberate, a sound that suggested the weather had made a decision and was executing it without particular concern for what was in its way. Caleb had not come in. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window and watched the yard go gray with driven snow and understood, with the clarity that comes from knowing a person's habits completely, that he was not going to come in. He was out there somewhere in it, because something needed doing, and he would not leave something needing doing because of weather. She put on her coat. Hester came into the kitchen and stopped. You are not going out in that. I am, Eleanor said. Mr. Hargrove said everyone inside. Then he should have come inside himself, Eleanor said, and opened the door. The storm hit her like a wall. Not wind that you lean into and manage, but the kind that makes decisions for you, that takes your direction and substitutes its own. She bent her head and walked. She knew the property well enough by now to navigate it without seeing it clearly. 5 weeks of methodical attention to every fence line, every outbuilding, every path between them. That attention was the only map she had. She used it. She found Walt at the east pasture fence, shouting something she could not hear. She grabbed his arm. Caleb, she said, getting the name out between gusts. South pasture, Walt shouted back. Cattle broke through the south fence. He went after them alone. 30 minutes ago, maybe. Her stomach dropped. The south pasture, the fence line along the creek. The exact ground Drummond had been trying to survey. She let go of Walt's arm and moved south. Walt came after her and she did not stop him. Together they went into the worst of it, heads down, moving by accumulated knowledge of a piece of land Eleanor had been studying since the day she arrived. She found him not far from the creek. He was on the ground beside his horse, and the horse was standing over him, not in distress, not trying to move away, but positioned with a kind of deliberate steadiness, as though she had decided her job was to stay exactly where she was until someone came. The sight of it hit Eleanor somewhere below her prepared responses, below the part of herself she kept managed and organized. She dropped beside him. Caleb, she put her hands on him. Where are you hurt? I'm fine, he said. You're on the ground. The horse slipped on the bank. She went down. I went with her. He started to push himself up. She put her hands on his shoulders and ran them down his sides with the efficient speed of someone who had watched enough ranch injuries to know where they hid, and found it when he pulled in a breath sharply. Ribs, she said. One maybe. I've had worse. That is not the reassurance you think it is, she said, sharply enough that his head came up. She had her hands on his face before she realized she had moved, both palms against his jaw, turning him toward her in the half-dark of the storm, checking his eyes the way you check for a different, deeper kind of damage. He was looking at her, really looking at her, in the way he had in the past week increasingly stopped trying to hide. I'm all right, he said. Eleanor, I know, she said. She did not move her hands. The wind tore around them, and the horse stood steady above them both, and the creak was loud somewhere below in the gray dark. And Eleanor was kneeling in the mud of the south pasture with her hands on Caleb Hargrove's face, and she understood, with the specific, terrible clarity of a woman whose locked door had not simply opened but had come entirely off its hinges, that the fear she felt was not the general fear you would feel for any person in trouble. It was specific, it was sharp, it pointed directly at him, and that kind of specificity only comes from one place. She helped him up. He was heavier than she had anticipated, and the ground was treacherous, and it took both of them and the fence post and the horse's patient steadiness to get him upright and moving. He kept one hand on her shoulder. She kept one arm around his side, careful of the ribs. She talked to him the whole way back, not about anything important, not about anything that required a response, just words, steady and continuous, something for him to follow through the noise. When they got back to the house, Hester took over with the brisk, competent fury of a woman who had been waiting 2 hours to do something useful. Eleanor stood in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on and let the shaking move through her, from her hands down to her knees, the way she always let it move through her after the thing she had been holding herself together for was finally over. Not during, never during, but in the aftermath when the body sent its bill. Walt appeared beside her. He did not speak. He simply stood there, which was more than enough. "He's going to be fine," Eleanor said. "Yes, ma'am," Walt said. "I know he's going to be fine," she said again. Not to Walt, exactly. More to herself, the way you say things you already know because you need to hear them out loud. "Yes, ma'am." She pressed her lips together and went to change out of her wet clothes and came back down and sat at the kitchen table. And when Hester brought her coffee, she wrapped her hands around it and breathed. Later, when Hester had gone and the ranch was quiet and the storm outside had dropped from catastrophic to merely serious, Eleanor came to the front room where Caleb was on the settee, ribs wrapped, turned down flat by Hester with an authority he had apparently decided not to contest. She sat in the chair across from him. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You scared me," she said. He started to say something. "I'm not finished," she said. "You scared me, and I'm telling you that because I decided some time ago that I wasn't going to pretend things were less than they are, and this isn't less than it is." She kept her voice level. "You scared me." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry," she said. "Just tell me next time. Before you go somewhere dangerous in a storm, tell me. Not because I'd stop you. I know better than to try to stop you, but because then I would know where to look." Something moved through his expression that she did not have a word for. "All right," he said. She got up. She took the blanket from the end of the settee and put it over his legs because she was a practical woman, and the room was getting cold and someone had to do it, and it had nothing to do with anything else. His hand caught her wrist, gently, not pulling, just present. She looked down at his hand, then at him. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was different, stripped of the management, the careful control. Just his voice, reaching her directly. "I've been trying not to say something, because I know what this was when it started. I know you didn't choose this the way a person chooses something they want." He stopped, started again. "I don't want to be another thing you're obligated to manage." She sat on the edge of the settee, close, the kind of close that is the decision. "You're not," she said. On paper, on the first day," she said. "You're not that anymore." He turned her hand over in his, very carefully, the way you handle something you are afraid of damaging, and held it. "I want to say something to you properly," he said, "when there isn't a storm attached to it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Saturday," she said. He looked at her. "Saturday," he said. She left her hand in his. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind dropping in slow increments, the world going gradually quieter around them. Neither of them moved. The lamp burned low between them. The house settled into its nighttime sounds, and in the south pasture, invisible in the dark, the fence line held. The creek ran below it. The water that 4 families depended on moved steadily through the cold ground, indifferent to what men wanted to do with it, patient in the way that water is always patient, finding its level, following the land, going where it was always going to go. The letter from Silas Drummond arrived on a Friday morning, delivered by a rider Eleanor did not recognize who left it without waiting for a response. A man who did not wait for an answer already knew what the answer would be, or did not care what it was. She noted this and moved on. The envelope was fine paper, the kind that cost more than it needed to because the cost was itself a message. The handwriting was deliberate and neat, the penmanship of a man who had been taught that precision in small things communicated authority in large ones. She read it at the kitchen table while Hester was out and the house was quiet. 2 paragraphs. The first expressed concern, carefully worded, almost gentle in its framing, regarding rumors circulating in Red Rock about the circumstances of her marriage. The nature of the debt arrangement between her father and Caleb Hargrove. The question, raised by various unnamed community members, of whether Eleanor had entered into the marriage freely or under a form of financial coercion that territorial law might recognize as grounds for examination. The second paragraph informed her that should she find herself in a position where she wished to leave Hargrove Ranch, certain parties were prepared to ensure she had the resources to do so comfortably and without further obligation. It was signed, S. Drummond. Eleanor read it twice. She set it flat on the table. She stood with her palms pressed against the wood for approximately 30 seconds looking at it. Then she picked it up and walked directly to the study where Caleb was reviewing correspondence from Samuel Voss, and she placed the letter in front of him without a word. She watched him read it. She watched the stillness descend. Not the ordinary stillness of a man thinking, but the specific, compressed quiet of controlled anger. The kind of stillness that is not calm at all, but is the shape calm makes when something furious is being held underneath it by deliberate force of will. He set the letter down. "He's trying to use you," Caleb said. His voice was very even. "He's not interested in me," Eleanor said. She sat down across from him. "He's interested in what challenging the legitimacy of this marriage would do to the land title. If the marriage can be argued as coerced, then every legal agreement attached to it becomes contestable," Eleanor said. "Including the deed registration we filed 3 weeks ago, including the water rights addendum that Voss just spent 2 weeks shoring up." Caleb looked at her steadily. "He couldn't get the land directly," she said. "He couldn't get it through the survey gambit. So now he's trying to dissolve the legal foundation the land title rests on." She paused. "He needs the marriage to look like what it looked like from the outside. A transaction, a woman sold to pay a debt. If he can establish that in front of the territorial court, he doesn't need to buy the south pasture. He makes the title itself uncertain enough that the water rights become unenforceable." The study was quiet. Outside, the November wind moved through the grass in long, deliberate waves. "We need to go to Red Rock," Eleanor said. "Together. We need to let people see us." Caleb looked at her. "To perform something." "No," she said. "To let them see what is. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "Unless you think there's nothing there to see." A long pause. "You know better than that," he said. "Then let's go to Red Rock," she said, "and give Drummond nothing to work with." But that was before the second letter arrived. It came on Monday, and it did not come to Eleanor. It came to the Red Rock Town Council with a copy forwarded to the territorial court in Helena. Lem brought it back from the post office in town with the speed of someone carrying something that could not wait. He handed it to Caleb. Caleb read it. His face did the thing she had only seen once before, the complete and total absence of any management at all, every layer stripped away at once, everything present at the surface. He handed it to Eleanor without speaking. The letter alleged that Eleanor Marsh had been coerced into marriage through financial manipulation. It cited witnesses, unnamed, described only as residents of Red Rock, who were prepared to testify that Eleanor had arrived at Hargrove Ranch in visible distress, that she had expressed reluctance to proceed with the marriage to multiple parties, and that the debt arrangement between Arthur Marsh and Caleb Hargrove constituted a form of legal coercion under territorial law. It requested a formal inquiry before the Red Rock Town Council to be conducted within 2 weeks. It was signed by Drummond's attorney. Eleanor read it once. She set it on the desk. She was quiet for a moment that cost her something she would not account for until later. "He has witnesses," she said. "Alleged witnesses," Caleb said. "People he's paid," she said. "Or persuaded, or both." She pressed her palms flat on the desk, the gesture she made when she needed something solid beneath her hands while she thought. "He's not building this because he believes it. He's building it because he needs a legal lever, and this is the most available one." She looked up. He looked at our situation and saw a story that was already written for him. A young woman, a family debt, a wealthy man twice her age. He doesn't need it to be true. He just needs it to be plausible enough to get in front of a judge. Caleb was watching her. His expression held the controlled fury, but underneath it now something else, something protective and particular that she registered without examining directly. "If this goes to formal inquiry," he said carefully, "you'll be asked to testify before the council, possibly in Helena." "I know," she said. "Eleanor," his voice dropped. "You can say whatever is true. Whatever is true about any part of this, you can say it." "Caleb, I mean it," he said. "If there is any part." "There isn't," she said. She held his gaze and let him see the full truth of it. Not the managed version, not the diplomatic one, but all of it. The version that had taken 6 weeks and a storm and a man on a creek bank in the mud to arrive at. "I know exactly what this marriage is. I know exactly what I want to say about it." He was very still. "What do you want to say about it?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment across the desk and the lamp and everything that had accumulated between them in 6 weeks of honest work and difficult days. "I want to say that I chose it," she said. "I want to say that I was given the choice, and I made it, and I would make it again." She paused. "And I want to say that the man this town has spent years deciding they don't know him, I do, and I intend to make sure that counts for something." His jaw worked. "You don't have to do this for the ranch," he said. "I'm not doing it for the ranch," she said. The silence after that was the loudest thing in the room. Outside, Red Rock was already talking. Word moved fast in a town that size, and a letter to the council was not the kind of thing that stayed private for more than 48 hours. By Tuesday, Eleanor had heard 3 different versions of it from 3 different people who arrived at the ranch with various pretexts and actual agendas. By Wednesday, she had spoken with Samuel Voss, who came out to the ranch and sat with them at the kitchen table and laid out the legal terrain with the calm precision of a man who had been practicing frontier law long enough to have seen most varieties of trouble and was not particularly alarmed by any of them. The date discrepancy is your strongest asset, Voss said, spreading his notes across the table. Whatever document Drummond intends to present, and I believe there is a document, based on what I've been able to learn from the court registry in Helena, the timeline is the thing. What do you mean? Eleanor said. Any statement about the circumstances of your marriage, about what you said or felt or expressed, could only have been gathered after you arrived here. Before your arrival, no one on this ranch knew you. Whatever Drummond claims as evidence of coercion has to have come from somewhere, and wherever it came from after the fact. Voss paused, which means if we can establish when it was gathered and compare that to when it claims to have been observed, the whole thing collapses. Eleanor was quiet. She was thinking about something, a thread she had been pulling at since Drummond's first letter arrived, something about the way the threat had been constructed, the specific details it contained, the way it seemed to know things it should not have known. There's a document, she said, with my father's name on it. Both men looked at her. I don't know that, she said. But Drummond needs a witness who was actually present for the original circumstances, someone who knew our family, who knew about the debt, who could speak to what I expressed at the time. The only person in that position is my father. She folded her hands on the table. And my father is a frightened man who spent 2 years watching everything he'd built come apart. He would sign something he didn't fully understand if someone told him it was to protect me. Caleb's expression went through several things. You think someone went to him, he said. I think someone told him what he needed to hear, Eleanor said. And I need to know before Friday whether I'm right. She left before 4 in the morning. Caleb had argued against it, quietly, thoroughly, with the focused persistence of a man who had constructed a reasonable alternative and was genuinely puzzled by her refusal to accept it. Take Walt's horse, he said finally. She's faster. He paused at the door of the study. Before 4. Before 4, she agreed. She rode in the dark on a road she had traveled every day of her childhood, through country that she knew by feel rather than sight. The way the road banked left before the Miller property, the place where the cottonwoods grew close enough on both sides that even in summer the road stayed cool. The sky above her was enormous and cold and salted with stars in the way Montana skies are in November, when the air is so clear that the stars seem closer than they have any right to be. She arrived as the first gray suggestion of dawn was appearing in the east, thin and unconvinced. Her mother was lighting the kitchen lamp when Eleanor came to the door. She opened it and stood in the frame and looked at her daughter on a horse in the pre-dawn dark, and her face went through 3 things very quickly. Clara, her mother said. What's happened? I need to talk to Papa, Eleanor said. Now. Before he goes out. Her father was already at the table. He was always the first one awake, the habit of a farming man who had spent 30 years rising before the sun to lie in the dark and inventory his worries. He looked up when Eleanor came in, and his face went the color of old ash. She looked at him and understood immediately that she was not going to need to ask. He already knew she was coming, had been waiting probably for days. What did you do, she said. Not a question. The flat, clear statement of a woman who has arrived at the answer and simply needs it confirmed. Her father's hands went flat on the table, the gesture of a man pressing himself against something solid. A man came, he said, about 3 weeks ago. What man? He said his name was Royce, said he was from the territorial court in Helena. He had papers, official-looking papers, a seal. Arthur Marsh's voice was very low. The voice of a man who has been carrying something heavy in secret for weeks and is finally, painfully, putting it down. He said there was a question about the debt repayment, whether it had been properly documented, whether the arrangement might be subject to review, and he needed you to sign something, Eleanor said. An affidavit, her father said. He said it was just confirming the facts, the debt, the amount, the circumstances. He said it was to protect you. He said the court needed to establish that you had entered the arrangement without. He stopped. His jaw worked. Without full freedom of choice, so that your rights could be. He told you it was to protect me, Eleanor said. Yes. Her father looked at her with the eyes of a man who has known for 3 weeks that he has done something he cannot undo, who has been living in the specific, airless hell of that knowledge every single day. Clara, I swear to God I didn't understand what it was for. He said the court needed to. You signed it, Eleanor said. I signed it. The kitchen was completely quiet. Her mother stood at the wall with her back to them, a woman holding very still so as not to disrupt something that needed to run its course. Eleanor breathed in. She breathed out. She looked at her father, at the hands on the table, at the red edges of his eyes, at the particular smallness of a man who has tried to help and caused harm and has had to live with the knowledge of it alone. She did not feel anger. She had moved past anger somewhere on the dark road over, because anger required energy she could not afford to spend and would not get her what she needed. The man who came to you, she said. Describe him. 40 maybe, clean clothes, too clean for a working man. He had a ring. Her father thought. A signet ring, gold, with some kind of mark on it. Did he give you a copy of what you signed? Her father reached into the coat hanging on the chair beside him, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who has been waiting for this moment and is not going to waste it, and produced a folded piece of paper. His hands were not steady. Eleanor took it. She read it. It was not a court document. It was not an official affidavit from any recognized authority. It was a sworn statement, privately drafted but formatted to resemble official documentation, claiming that Arthur Marsh had witnessed his daughter express unwillingness to enter the marriage with Caleb Hargrove, and had felt compelled to accept the arrangement due to financial circumstances that left her without meaningful alternatives. It was dated 6 weeks prior to this morning. Eleanor looked at the date. She read it again. 6 weeks ago, she had been at Hargrove Ranch for barely 1 week. The statement described the kitchen at Hargrove Ranch, the east-facing window, the position of the stove, the view of the barn from the main door. Details that Arthur Marsh could not have known. Details that the man named Royce could only have gathered by being inside the house, or by being told by someone who had. She folded the paper with careful, precise movements. "I'm taking this," she said. "Clara, Papa." She looked at him, not with anger, with something more honest and more difficult than anger, with the clear-eyed acknowledgement of a woman who loves a flawed man and has decided that love is not diminished by accuracy. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." He straightened in his chair, slightly, barely perceptibly, but he did it. "This document was obtained by Silas Drummond through a man named Royce who lied to you about who he was and what he needed. It is not a court document. It is not protecting me. It is being used to attack my husband and take land that does not belong to Drummond." She held her father's gaze. "I need you to come to Red Rock on Friday and tell the council exactly what happened. What this man told you, what he looked like, what you signed and why." Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened that she had not seen in 2 years. Something that had been folded down under the weight of debt and shame and the diminishment of a man who has failed the people he loves. He straightened, fully. His spine found its full length. His hand steadied on the table. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she said. She rode back to Hargrove Ranch with the document folded inside her coat and the dawn coming up properly now, pink and gold and enormous across the eastern sky, and something in her chest that was not quite relief but lived in the same neighborhood, the feeling of a peace settling into place. Caleb was in the yard when she rode back in. He had not gone to the north pasture. He was waiting, standing with his hands at his sides in the early morning light, watching the road. She dismounted and handed him the paper without speaking. He read it. When he looked up, his expression held the controlled fury, but she could see underneath it now. She had learned to see underneath it. And what was underneath was something older and more personal than anger about land or water rights. "Someone came to your father," he said. "A man named Royce," she said. "Told him he was from the territorial court. Told him the document was to protect me. Your father believed him. My father wanted to believe him," she said, "which is not the same thing, but it's close enough that we have to work with it honestly." She took the paper back. "The date on this is wrong. It's dated 6 weeks ago, but it contains details about the interior of this house that could only have been observed after I arrived. The east window in the kitchen, the position of the stove. Your father couldn't have known those things. Royce was inside this house, Caleb. Or someone who was inside this house told him. He was very still. 'Come inside,' he said. 'Tell me everything, all of it.'" She followed him in. Hester took one look at Eleanor and started coffee without being asked. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table and laid out everything she knew. The document, the date, her father's description of Royce, the signet ring, the direction of the approach, the specific details in the statement that could only have come from inside the house. Caleb sat across from her and listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without performing attention, simply present with everything she was telling him. When she finished, Hester said from the kitchen doorway where she had been standing quietly for the past several minutes, "There was a—" Both of them turned. Hester's expression was the one Eleanor had come to recognize as her most important one. The expression of a woman who has been turning something over for weeks and has finally determined that the right moment to say it has arrived. "He came to the back door," Hester said. 4 weeks ago, during the week Mr. Hargrove was riding to Red Rock for the legal consultations. He said he was delivering a package from town. I took the package and checked it." She paused. He waited on the step. "The back door was open. I'd been airing out the kitchen. He stood there for perhaps 5 minutes. What did he look like?" Eleanor said. "About 40, Hester said. Clean clothes for a delivery man, had a ring, a pause, gold, with a mark on it." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "The east window," she said. "Can you see it from the back step?" "Clearly," Hester said. "And the stove, and the angle to the barn." The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb stood. "I need to send word to Voss tonight," he said. "I've already written it," Eleanor said. "It's on your desk. Everything Hester just said, everything I found this morning. Read it and add anything I've missed." She looked at him. "And Caleb, Hester needs to be willing to say this in front of the council on Friday." Hester straightened. "I'll say what I saw," she said with the flat certainty of a woman who has never needed encouragement to tell the truth. Drummond made his final move the following Thursday. It arrived in the form of a rider she did not recognize. Not Royce, someone new, someone who came to the front gate in the late afternoon and asked for Mrs. Hargrove and handed her a sealed envelope and left without speaking. Inside was a single page in Drummond's handwriting. It said that he was aware she intended to appear before the council on Friday, that he wished to offer her a final opportunity to consider the full picture before she did. that her father was a man of limited legal sophistication who had signed a document under incomplete information, and that if the matter proceeded to formal inquiry, Arthur Marsh's role in producing that document would be subject to scrutiny. That Drummond had no personal interest in seeing an elderly farmer face legal consequences. That he could not, however, guarantee the outcome if Eleanor forced the matter to a public proceeding. He suggested she consider what Friday would cost her family before she decided to attend. She read it twice. She went inside. Caleb was in the kitchen. She handed him the letter. He read it. His expression did the thing she knew now, the slow, total arrival of something that was not going to be managed away. "He's threatening your father," Caleb said. "He's reminding me that my father is a pressure point," Eleanor said. "He thinks I'll stand down to protect him." She set her hands flat on the kitchen table. "If I stand down, Drummond gets the water rights. 4 ranches lose their independence, and my father learns that his mistake cannot be corrected, that the only thing left to do is carry it for the rest of his life." She looked up at Caleb. "If I stand up, my father gets to be part of fixing it. He gets to be the man who told the truth when it mattered." She paused. "I am not going to take that from him." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then, he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around her. And it was not a complicated thing, not a tentative thing, not the thing of 2 people still negotiating the distance between them. It was simply the most direct available expression of everything that had been building for 6 weeks. The warmth of it, the steadiness of it. The specific solidity of a man who had spent his whole life holding everything alone and had just understood, fully and without reservation, that this was someone worth holding on to. She held on. After a moment he said quietly against her hair, "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "Don't," she said. "I'm terrified." "I know," he said. "That's why it's true." She laughed, a real laugh. The kind that arrives without warning and surprises you with its own realness, loosening something in the chest that had been held tight without her fully knowing it. She stepped back and looked at him. "Walt needs to ride to my family's farm tonight and stay with them. I don't trust Drummond's restraint once he understands I'm not standing down." "Walt leaves within the hour," Caleb said. "And this letter goes to Voss tonight," she said. "The threat itself is evidence. I'll send Clem to Voss directly." She nodded. She moved to the desk to write the note. He watched her for a moment. "Eleanor," he said. She looked up. "After Friday," he said. "When this is done." He stopped. "Try it again. I want to say something to you that isn't about legal documents or water rights or Silas Drummond." "I know," she said softly. "I want to say it properly," he said. "When there isn't a crisis attached to it." "Saturday," she said. He looked at her. "Saturday," he agreed. She looked back down at the paper and wrote, and told herself very firmly that Saturday was only 2 days away and she had a council meeting to survive first, and she was absolutely not going to spend tonight thinking about what he wanted to say. She thought about it the entire time she was writing. Friday came in cold and clear, the kind of November morning that Montana produces occasionally, as though to demonstrate what clarity actually looks like when the sky commits to it. Walt arrived back from the Marsh farm with Eleanor's parents and Nora and her younger brother at 8:30, earlier than she had asked. Her father climbed down from the wagon in his church clothes. He had shaved. He had the look of a man who had spent 3 weeks in a specific kind of imprisonment and had been handed the key and had already decided before anyone asked exactly how he intended to use it. "Papa," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "I'm going to say every word of it," he said. "You don't need to worry about me." She put her hand on his arm. "I know," she said. They rode to Red Rock together, Eleanor and Caleb in front, her family behind, Walt and Clem flanking, Samuel Voss already waiting at the council hall when they arrived. The main street was fuller than a regular Friday morning, which told Eleanor everything she needed to know about how thoroughly the news had traveled. She saw faces she recognized, the women from the dry goods store, people who had been in Red Rock her entire life, who had watched the Marsh family struggle through 2 bad years, who had been present for every version of the story being told about her marriage. She held her head level. Caleb stepped down from the horse and came around to her side before she had moved. He held out his hand, not as assistance, not as courtesy, but as statement, the deliberate, unhurried act of a man who understood exactly what a public gesture meant in a town this size, and was making it with his eyes fully open. She took his hand. They walked into the council hall together. Drummond was already inside, seated near the front with 2 attorneys from Helena, men whose clothing announced the expense of their retainer before they opened their mouths. Drummond looked up when Eleanor and Caleb entered. His expression moved through a quick sequence of recalibrations before settling into the composed confidence of a man who believed his position was secure. Then he saw Arthur Marsh walking in behind them. The composure held, but something tightened underneath it. Good, Eleanor thought. Gerald Fitch, the council chairman, was a man of about 60 who had the expression of someone who had not asked for any of this and was going to conduct it as professionally as he could manage while privately wishing it was someone else's jurisdiction. He called the meeting to order with the reluctant authority of a man doing his duty under protest. Drummond's Helena attorneys went first. They were good, thorough, measured, skilled at the art of making an allegation sound like a reasonable concern rather than a calculated attack. They presented the document. They outlined the claim of financial coercion. They used words like vulnerability and undue influence and freedom of choice with the careful precision of men who had selected each one for its legal resonance. They did not mention the date. They did not know about the date. When they finished, Fitch said, "Mr. Voss." Samuel Voss stood. He presented the date discrepancy first, cleanly, factually, without drama. The document bearing Arthur Marsh's signature was dated 6 weeks prior. The interior details it contained, the east-facing kitchen window, the position of the stove, the sightline to the barn, were details that could only have been gathered after Eleanor Marsh had been in residence at Hargrove Ranch. Arthur Marsh had never visited the ranch. The timeline was a physical impossibility. A murmur moved through the hall. Then Voss called Arthur Marsh. Eleanor's father walked to the front of the hall in his church clothes and stood with his hands at his sides and his spine at its full length, and he told the truth. All of it. The man named Royce, the official-looking papers with the territorial seal, the claim that he was from the court in Helena, the explanation that the document was to protect his daughter, to establish her rights, to ensure she had legal recourse if she needed it. The way he had wanted to believe it, had wanted so badly to believe that there was something he could still do, some way to help the daughter he had failed, that he had let himself be guided toward a signature he should have refused. His voice broke twice. He kept going both times. When he finished, the hall was completely quiet. The silence that falls when a room full of people has witnessed something true and painful and is deciding what to do with it. Drummond's lead attorney stood to cross-examine. He was skilled and he pressed hard, but Arthur Marsh had nothing left to protect. He answered every question with the flat, exhausted honesty of a man who has put down the last thing he was carrying and has no interest in picking it back up. Then Voss called Hester. Hester Calloway walked to the front of the hall with the unhurried confidence of a woman who has been managing complicated situations for 55 years and finds public testimony considerably less alarming than most of them. She described the man at the back door, the step, the open kitchen door, the east window clearly visible from where he stood, the gold ring with the mark on it, the same ring Arthur Marsh had described on the man named Royce. Drummond's attorneys exchanged a look. Drummond's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Then Eleanor stood up. She had not been called. She had not been scheduled. She stood up from her seat beside Caleb, and Gerald Fitch looked at her with the expression of a man navigating rapidly away from his prepared agenda. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said. "I'd like to speak," she said. "This is irregular," Drummond's lead attorney said. From the back of the hall, a voice said, "Let her speak." Eleanor did not turn to see who had said it. She kept her eyes on Gerald Fitch and waited. Fitch looked at Drummond's attorneys. He looked at Voss. He looked at Eleanor. He was a careful man and a fair one, and whatever he thought about irregularity, he was also a man who had been watching a room of his neighbors lean forward in their seats for the past 20 minutes. He nodded. Eleanor turned to face the room. She had prepared for this. She had also not prepared for this. Both things were simultaneously true, which is usually the condition of the moments that matter most. "My name is Eleanor Hargrove," she said. 6 weeks ago, my name was Eleanor Marsh. I want to tell you something about the woman I was before I came to Hargrove Ranch, because this room has been making decisions about her without knowing a single true thing about who she actually was. The room was very still. I want to tell you about the morning I signed that paper. I was 21 years old. I was more frightened than I had ever been in my life. I sat down at a table and I picked up a pen and I signed my name beside a stranger's, and I did it with my eyes open, knowing exactly what I was doing and exactly why. She paused. I signed it because my family was going to lose everything they had, and I had the means to prevent it. And I am not a woman who lets children go hungry to preserve her own comfort. She let that settle. The man I married told me on the first day in his kitchen, over a cup of coffee, that I could leave. That the debt was settled regardless of what I decided. That he would not use my family's situation to hold me to something I did not want. She looked at the room. He gave me freedom when he had every contractual right to do the opposite. That is the man Mr. Drummond is asking you to believe coerced me. She looked at Drummond directly. "This proceeding is not about my welfare," she said. "It is about water rights. It is about a man who has spent 3 years trying to acquire something that does not belong to him, and who is now using my name and my father's name and the story of a family's hardship to get it through a door that was closed to him every other way he tried." Her voice was even, clear. She had not raised it once. "I did not stay at Hargrove Ranch because I had no choice. I did not stay because I was afraid. I stayed because I found something worth staying for, and I will not have that turned into a weapon against the man I chose." The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Then Harriet Boone from the back of the council hall began to clap. Not a wave, not a rush. One woman, 60 years old, the postmistress of Red Rock, Montana, the woman who had sat on a porch with a frightened girl 3 weeks before she left home and said, "Don't decide what he is before you've looked at him properly," clapping steady and deliberate, as though she had been waiting for exactly this moment and intended to mark it properly. A few others joined, then more. Drummond was looking at Eleanor with the expression of a man who has understood, several moves too late, that he has been playing a different game than the one he thought. Gerald Fitch called a recess. He took the documentation from both parties and disappeared into the back office with 2 other council members and the expression of a man who intended to read everything very carefully before he said a single word. Drummond left the hall without speaking to anyone. His attorneys followed with the efficient dignity of men who had been retained at considerable expense to maintain composure under all conditions, and were earning every dollar of it. Eleanor stood in the center of the council hall as the room slowly emptied around her and felt the shaking start in her hands. The way it always started, in the aftermath, when the thing she had been holding herself together for was finally over. Caleb's hand covered hers. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Her father reached her next. He stopped in front of her and looked at her with the expression she remembered from childhood. The one she had not seen in 2 years. The one that meant he was simultaneously proud and undone by whoever she was turning out to be. "Clara," he said. "You did well, Papa," she said. His jaw worked. He put his arms around her and she let him, and her mother appeared at his shoulder with red eyes and the expression of a woman who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told she can set it down. Harriet Boone made her way through the thinning crowd with the patient courtesy of a woman who has learned that the best time to say the things that matter is after the noise has died down. She looked at Eleanor with the expression of a woman who has been right about something important and is too dignified to say so directly. "You looked at him properly," Harriet said. "I did," Eleanor said. Harriet looked at Caleb. "And you," she said, "have been waiting for someone like her longer than you probably know." Caleb looked slightly startled, an expression Eleanor had almost never seen on him, and which she decided immediately to remember for a long time. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Harriet nodded, satisfied, and went to find someone else to be correct about. On the road back, as the afternoon light went thin and golden across the valley, her father's wagon pulled alongside theirs at the fork where the Marsh farm path split off north. Arthur Marsh looked across the distance between the 2 wagons at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him. Neither man spoke. There was nothing in the look that required words. It held the acknowledgement between 2 men that the situation had been what it had been, that neither of them was the villain of it, and that the woman who had moved between them had been right about everything worth being right about. Her father had failed his daughter once. He had stood up when it counted, and Caleb Hargrove, who had made no secret of what he thought the arrangement was, had turned out to be exactly what Harriet Boone had told a frightened girl he was, back on a porch in October when the ink was barely dry. Her father nodded once. Caleb nodded back. Then Arthur clicked to his horse and turned north, and Eleanor watched the wagon go until it disappeared into the cottonwoods, and she did not look away until it was completely gone. "He'll be all right," Caleb said. "I know," she said. "He's stronger than he thinks he is." A pause. Most people are. She felt him glance at her sideways. She looked forward and said nothing more, and the wagon carried them home through the long November light. Fitch's written determination arrived at Hargrove Ranch the following morning by rider before 9 o'clock. Voss had told them to expect it quickly, and he had been right. Caleb read it at the kitchen table. He set it down and looked at Eleanor. The council found no evidence of coercion in the Hargrove marriage. The document bearing Arthur Marsh's signature was formally invalidated, and the matter of its procurement referred to the Territorial Marshal's Office for investigation of fraud and impersonation of a court officer. The water rights attached to the South Pasture were confirmed as legally belonging to Hargrove Ranch. The counter-filing against Drummond's agent was entered into the territorial record. "It's done," Caleb said. "Yes," Eleanor said. All of it, all of it." She pushed his coffee toward him across the table. "Today it's done." He picked up the coffee. He looked at her over it with an expression she had been cataloging for 6 weeks, the one she had taken to calling his real expression, because it was the one that appeared only when he had stopped managing what he showed and simply let his face say what it meant. It had the quality of a man who had put something down. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to feel the difference in what he was carrying. That evening the ranch had the quality of a place exhaling. Hester produced a supper that was significantly better than the occasion strictly required. Walt and Clem stayed at the kitchen table longer than usual. There was laughter, the real kind, the kind that arrives when people have been through something together and come out the other side of it and find, with some surprise, that they are glad of each other's company. Eleanor watched Caleb at the head of the table and thought about what it meant to watch a person change. Not the features, those were the same, but the quality of how he occupied a room. The set of a man who had spent decades carrying everything alone and had finally carefully allowed himself to put some portion of it down and found to his apparent surprise that the world had not ended. After Hester had retired and Walt and Clem had gone to the bunkhouse and the lamps were burning low, Caleb found her in the study where she had gone with the transparent excuse of reviewing correspondence. She was not reviewing correspondence. She was sitting at the desk with a pen she had not written anything with, looking at the lamp, thinking about 6 weeks of a life she had arrived at, expecting to endure, and had discovered somewhere along the way she did not want to leave. He came in and sat across from her. The lamp was between them the way it had been on 100 evenings. She thought about the first time she had sat in this room with him, the careful distance of strangers who had been handed each other, and were uncertain what to do with the gift. They had come a very long way from that room. "It's Saturday," he said. "It is," she said. He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally decided the weight of it is less than the weight of not saying it. He looked at the desk, then up at her. "When my mother died," he said, "I made a decision. Not consciously, the kind of decision you make without knowing you've made it. That only becomes visible later when you look at the shape of the years that followed." He looked at the desk, then up at her. "I decided I was done needing people, not because I thought it was right, because I thought it was safe. I built everything you see out there on that principle, that if you need nothing, nothing can be taken from you." He paused. "I've been running on that principle for 30 years, and it worked. In the way that principles work when you apply them consistently, the ranch grew, the land held, the operation ran. I was competent. I was solvent. I was entirely alone, and I told myself that was a choice rather than a condition." He looked at her steadily. "And then you walked into my stable and asked whether my horse was all right before you asked a single thing about yourself, and I thought, this one is going to be trouble." Something moved through her chest, warm and impossible to contain. "I was right," he said. She felt the almost law and let it come. "You took apart every distance I tried to keep," he said. "Not deliberately. You weren't trying to reach me. You were simply being what you are. And what you are is the most clear-eyed, capable, honest person I have ever known." He stopped. "And I am in love with you. That is what I wanted to say on Saturday, and it is Saturday, and I am saying it plainly because you deserve someone who says true things plainly." He held her gaze. "I love you, Eleanor." The lamp burned between them. Outside, Hargrove Ranch was quiet in the way of a place that has found its rhythm. The horses still in their stalls, the grass moving in the night wind, the south pasture holding its water in the cold, dark ground. Eleanor stood up. She walked around the desk. She sat on the edge of it directly in front of him, close enough that the distance between them was no longer a neutral thing, and she looked at him the way she had been looking at him for weeks, fully and without the management, with everything she had been keeping behind a locked door. "I love you," she said. "I spent a considerable amount of energy trying not to, and I made reasonable progress until you got yourself knocked down by a horse on a creek bank in a storm, and I discovered the kind of fear that only comes from one place." She paused. "You are the most infuriating, patient, decent man I have ever met. I did not come to Hargrove Ranch expecting to find you. I am more grateful than I know how to say that I did." He reached up and took her hand. She looked at their hands together. She thought about the morning she had signed her name on a kitchen table in the thin October light and believed she was signing away her future. She had been wrong about that. She understood that now with the same clear-eyed certainty she applied it to everything. She had not been signing away her future. She had been signing toward it. He stood, and they were very close, and he put his other hand against her face in the careful way he handled everything he was afraid of damaging. And he looked at her for a long moment with the open, unguarded expression that was the most honest thing about him. The thing underneath all the years of careful construction, the man he had been the whole time and had simply not been certain anyone would stay long enough to see. Then he kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not the kind that exists in stories told for effect. It was the kind that happens when two people have been finding their way toward each other through weeks of honest work and difficult days and small, persistent acts of care, and the moment finally arrives when there is simply no more reason to be anywhere but exactly here. It was, Eleanor thought, the most real thing that had ever happened to her. They stood in the study for a while after, and neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be added. The lamp burned low. Outside the window, Hargrove Ranch settled deeper into its nighttime quiet. The mountains stood in the dark to the west. The sky above the valley was enormous and salted with stars. That night, long after Caleb had gone to bed and the house was entirely still, Eleanor sat at the desk and wrote. Not a letter to anyone, not a document with a purpose. Just the kind of writing you do when something has happened that is too large to simply carry inside yourself, when you need to set it down outside yourself and look at it from the proper distance. She wrote, I came here with a locked door and the key in my pocket. I had plans for this. I was going to be useful and competent and careful, and I was not going to feel anything I had not prepared to feel. I was going to survive this the way I had survived everything, by keeping the important parts of myself in a place where nothing could reach them. She paused. She looked at the lamp. She wrote, I was wrong about nearly everything. She held the pen above the paper for a long moment. Then she wrote, I was wrong about the man. I was wrong about the marriage. I was wrong about what I was capable of and what I was willing to risk and what love actually looks like when it arrives, which is nothing like the warnings and nothing like what you were bracing for. It looks like a man who reads Dickens to his dying mother for 11 nights and never tells a soul. It looks like a covered dish left on an old farmer's porch in the dark. It looks like someone who gave me freedom when he had every right to keep me and kept me anyway by never once trying to. She set the pen down. She looked at what she had written. She folded it once and put it in the drawer and blew out the lamp. She went to bed in the room that had slowly, over 6 weeks, become her room. In the house that had slowly become her house, in the life that had come to her in the shape of an obligation and had turned out to be something else entirely. Some endings are not endings. Some contracts signed in desperation turn out to be the document that leads you home. Some men who appear cold are simply men who have been waiting, without knowing it, for the one person who would look at them carefully enough and long enough to see the fire that had been burning the whole time, quietly, steadily, needing only the right kind of witness to become the warmth that changes everything. Eleanor Hargrove had been that witness, and Caleb Hargrove, who had spent 15 years building a ranch that no one could take from him, had finally built the one thing he had not known he was missing. A life that was worth the land it stood on, because the right person was standing in it beside him. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything.